Alright folks, settle in for a story. Tonight, we're diving into a world where finding the one had nothing to do with swiping right, and everything to do with professional matchmakers, stern-faced astrologers, and a goose. Yes, a goose. We're exploring what dating, or rather the intricate business of getting hitched, was really like in ancient China, where love was often the last thing on the checklist. So, before we begin, if you're ready to unravel these mysteries, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We're on a quest for 1,000 subscribers, and I'm told it helps appease the YouTube ancestors. Now, dim the lights, fluff up your pillows, and let's journey back in time. In ancient China, marriage wasn't so much a rom-com as it was a high-stakes family merger, complete with contracts, negotiations, and a whole lot of etiquette that could make your head spin. The entire concept of dating for romantic exploration was, for the most part, a non-starter. Think of it less as boy meets girl, and more as family A meticulously assesses family B's assets, ancestral reputation, and most importantly, the astrological compatibility of their offspring. This was all deeply wrapped up in the philosophy of honoring your ancestors and fulfilling your duty to the family. The individual's desires, especially a woman's, were often secondary to the collective good. This is key to understanding why the dating period was essentially a series of formal steps managed by families, with little room for the kind of personal courtship we know today. Now, if your parents decided it was time for you to fulfill your filial duty and contribute to the family lineage, and let's be honest, that was a huge part of it, they wouldn't just send you to the local lantern festival hoping you'd bump into someone suitable. Oh no, they'd call in a professional, a specialist, the matchmaker. In ancient China, the matchmaker was an absolutely indispensable figure in the whole marriage saga. Trying to get married without one was considered not just unconventional, but downright scandalous and improper. The saying, "men and women do not associate without a matchmaker," became the societal norm, highlighting how central they were to the process. These weren't just your Auntie Ling who knew everyone in the village and had a knack for pairing people up, though local knowledge was certainly part of their toolkit. Matchmakers in ancient China held a recognized, almost official status. Some were even state-sanctioned, functioning a bit like a government department, dedicated to ensuring society's marital cogs kept turning smoothly. Private matchmakers also thrived, and importantly, often held the same level of authority as their official counterparts, providing a crucial layer of legitimacy to the unions they helped forge. Their presence made the marriage lawful and worthy of social sanction, which was vital in a society that placed enormous emphasis on propriety and adherence to established norms. So what exactly did these ancient headhunters of the heart, or more accurately, headhunters of suitable family alliances, actually do? Well, their first job was essentially detective work. Given the strict Confucian ideals that often limited direct contact between unmarried men and women, especially from different families, the matchmaker served as the crucial go-between. They would meticulously gather information, sussing out prospective families, evaluating their social standing, wealth, reputation, and of course, the qualities of the potential bride or groom. They were the eyes and ears for the parents, who were keen to arrange marriages based on comparable conditions in all these aspects, including the all-important betrothal gifts and dowry. The process usually kicked off when the groom's family engaged a matchmaker. This matchmaker would then approach the family of a potential bride, often bearing initial gifts to signal serious intent and, let's be honest, to make a good first impression. One rather charming traditional gift mentioned in some historical accounts was a goose. Why a goose, you ask? Well, wild geese were seen as punctual and honest birds, because they migrate at regular times, and these were considered desirable qualities in a wife. So, you're not just proposing marriage, you're subtly implying you expect your future daughter-in-law to be as reliable as seasonal waterfowl. The bride's family's acceptance of these initial gifts was a positive sign, an indication that they were willing to consider the match. If the initial proposal was met with a favorable reception, perhaps they were impressed by the goose, or the matchmaker's persuasive pitch, the matchmaker's role would escalate. They would then delve deeper, formally requesting the bride's full name, and most critically, her exact birth date and hour of birth. This information wasn't for updating ancient China's equivalent of a social media profile. It was vital for the next, often nail-biting, stage, astrological divination. The matchmaker also had to be a paragon of discretion. Leaking sensitive information about a family or a potential match, especially if an offer was turned down, could lead to a significant loss of face for the families involved, and would undoubtedly ruin the matchmaker's career. Imagine the ancient equivalent of online reviews. 1 star. Matchmaker Ping told everyone about my daughter's unfortunate birth hour. Would not recommend. So the matchmaker was part detective, part diplomat, part PR agent, and part HR recruiter, for lifelong family-binding contracts. And you thought your job was stressful. Their ability to navigate these delicate social waters, maintain confidentiality, and ultimately bring two families to an agreement was paramount, making them a cornerstone of the entire social structure surrounding marriage. Alright, so the matchmaker's on the case, armed with a possibly bewildered goose, and a great deal of social pressure. But this isn't a one-and-done deal. Oh no. We're embarking on the 6 etiquettes, a series of rituals so detailed, so important, they'd make a modern royal wedding planner weep with envy, and possibly demand a hefty raise. This intricate system, known more fully as the 3 letters and 6 etiquettes, wasn't some recent invention. It has roots stretching way back to the Zhou dynasty, which means we're talking over 2,000 years of tradition, shaping how people got married in China. The Duke of Zhou, a revered figure from that era, is often credited with formalizing many of these rites. The whole point of these elaborate steps wasn't just to make things complicated, though it sometimes feels that way. It was all about demonstrating respect, not just between the couple, who, remember, might not have even met yet, but crucially, between the two families, who were about to be linked. It was a public affirmation that this wasn't just two people deciding to shack up, it was the forging of a significant kinship tie, fulfilling obligations to ancestors, and ensuring the continuation of the family lineage. Every single step, every gift, every bow, had a purpose, a symbolic meaning that resonated deeply within the cultural context. So let's dive into the first few of these etiquettes. First up is the formal proposal. As we touched upon, this is where the matchmaker, acting on behalf of the groom's family, officially presents the proposal to the bride's family. They don't come empty-handed. They bring gifts, those symbolic offerings like tea, wine, fruits, or our aforementioned goose, to show sincerity and respect. The reputation of the bride's family was a key consideration at this stage. If her family was satisfied with the proposal and the initial overtures, they would accept some of these gifts. This acceptance was a crucial signal, indicating their willingness to proceed with discussions, and that the matchmaker could report the good news back to the groom's family. It's like the ancient equivalent of saying, "Okay, you have our attention. Your goose is acceptable. Let's talk." Once the initial proposal was tentatively accepted, the process moved to the second etiquette, asking for the name and birth details. This sounds simple, but it was a critical step. The matchmaker, now acting as a conduit for increasingly serious negotiations, would formally request the bride's full name, and more importantly, her precise birth details, the year, month, day, and hour of her birth. These details were known as the 4 pillars of birth time. The groom's family needed this information not for idle curiosity or to send a birthday scroll, but for a cosmic background check of the highest order. This information was taken to a fortune teller, or an astrologer. This expert in the mystical arts would then compare the birth charts of the potential bride and groom, often using the complex system of the Chinese zodiac and the 5 elements, metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, to determine their compatibility. The goal was to predict whether the union would be harmonious, prosperous, and, very importantly, blessed with children, especially sons, to continue the family line. Imagine the suspense, the entire future of this potential alliance, the hopes of 2 families, and the personal destinies of 2 young people, hung in the balance, all depending on whether your metal pig was deemed astrologically compatible with his water rooster. If the fortune teller peered at the charts, consulted the heavens, and declared it a mismatch, a cosmic car crash waiting to happen, the marriage negotiations could be abruptly terminated right then and there. No amount of parental eagerness or socio-economic advantage could easily override a dire astrological forecast. There were even specific animal sign combinations that were considered taboo. For instance, a match between a dragon and a tiger was often seen as problematic, as was a pairing of 2 tigers, or a horse with an ox, or a pig with a monkey. These beliefs were deeply ingrained, and ignoring them was seen as courting disaster for the couple and their families. This reliance on divination highlights how much the ancient Chinese worldview incorporated elements of fate, destiny, and the influence of cosmic forces on human affairs. It also provided a kind of objective, external validation, or rejection, for a match, taking some of the direct pressure off the families if things didn't work out. "Sorry," they could say, "it's not us, it's the stars." If, however, the stars aligned, the zodiac signs danced in harmony, and the fortune teller gave a celestial thumbs up, then the families could proceed to the 3rd etiquette, the betrothal gifts and confirmation of auspiciousness. The term itself refers to the good fortune predicted by the divination. With this auspicious news, the groom's family would dispatch another round of gifts to the bride's family. This was a more formal confirmation of the engagement. Accompanying these gifts was the first of the 3 letters, the betrothal letter. This wasn't just a casual note, it was a formal document, often beautifully written on red paper with golden characters. Red and gold being colors of joy and good fortune. The betrothal letter would typically include the groom's family name, his birth date, and his astrological sign, along with a sincere and poetically phrased expression of the family's wish to unite with the bride's family. It was, in essence, the official engagement contract. This stage also involved the crucial task of selecting the actual wedding date. This wasn't as simple as checking everyone's availability on a shared calendar. Again, an astrologer or fortune teller would be consulted to pick an auspicious date based on the couple's birth dates and the Chinese lunar calendar, ensuring the chosen day was filled with good luck and harmonious energy for the impending nuptials. The acceptance of these betrothal gifts, and the formal betrothal letter by the bride's family, pretty much sealed the engagement. It was the ancient equivalent of updating your relationship status to engaged, and sending out a very fancy, astrologically approved, and family-endorsed save-the-date card. Each of these initial steps, from the first proposal to the confirmation of auspiciousness, was a carefully choreographed move in a much larger dance, gradually escalating the commitment and investment from both families, all while ensuring that the union was in harmony not just with earthly concerns but with the perceived will of the cosmos. Okay, the stars have aligned. The families are tentatively on board after consulting with their preferred cosmic advisor, and the initial betrothal letter has been exchanged. Now things get even more serious, and frankly more laden with stuff. We move into the 4th, and arguably one of the most materially significant, of the 6 etiquettes, the grand presentation of betrothal gifts. This is where the groom's family really rolls out the red carpet, or rather, rolls in the carts laden with presents. This was the moment to demonstrate their sincerity, their economic stability, and their profound respect for the bride and her family. Think of it as the dowry's more flamboyant cousin, coming from the groom's side, and it was a very public display of commitment. The range and symbolism of these gifts were astonishing, meticulously chosen to convey blessings for prosperity, fertility, harmony, and a long, happy life. While specifics could vary by region and the wealth of the families, some common categories of gifts were almost universal. First, there was the betrothal money. This was a sum of money presented to the bride's family, a direct token of appreciation for raising their daughter, and a symbol of the groom's family's respect. Then came the gold jewelry. Gold, being a symbol of wealth and prosperity, was a must. Often this included a set of 4 specific pieces: a necklace, a bracelet, a ring, and a pair of earrings. A tradition known as the 4 pieces of gold, particularly common among Teochew families. Other dialects might favor dragon and phoenix bangles, with the dragon representing the groom and the phoenix the bride, together symbolizing marital harmony. And then there was the food, oh glorious food, all packed with meaning. Traditional Chinese wedding pastries were essential. These weren't just any cakes, they were special wedding cakes, like the iconic dragon phoenix cakes, again symbolizing that perfect marital unity. These pastries also served a practical purpose. They were often sent by the bride's family to their relatives and friends, as an announcement of the marriage, and an invitation to the upcoming celebrations. You'd also find 2 pairs of dragon phoenix wax candles, their flickering flames perhaps meant to light the couple's path to a bright future. For those who could afford it, dried seafood was a luxurious and highly symbolic gift. Items like abalone, scallops, fish maws, and sea cucumbers represented abundance and prosperity. The number of different types of seafood offered, often 4, 6, or 8 treasures, also carried meaning, with more varieties signifying greater blessings. The 3 types of meats were also common, typically chicken, symbolizing harmony and unity, pork for wealth, and fish, which sounds like the word for abundance or surplus, wishing the couple a life of plenty. Even fruits and nuts were chosen with care. 2 pairs of coconuts were a popular gift, because the name in some dialects sounds like to have grandfathers and sons, a clear wish for the continuation of the family line through many generations. Baskets of fresh fruits like peaches, longevity, grapes, fertility, abundance, and apples, peace, conveyed general good wishes and fortune. However, some fruits were avoided. For example, among Cantonese families, oranges and mangoes were sometimes skipped due to unlucky homophonic associations with pity and death. The 8 treasures of dried fruits and seeds, such as dried lychee, dried longan, lily bulbs, and lotus seeds, symbolized prosperity, sweetness in the marriage, and the growth of their family. Similarly, the 4 treasures of candies like rock sugar and dried longan represented a sweet and happy life for the couple. Other symbolic items included tea leaves and sesame seeds, which signified the bride's faithfulness and loyalty to the marriage. 4 bottles of wine or other alcohol were for celebration and festivity. And a rather practical yet symbolic gift was charcoal, which represented a bright and prosperous future for the bride in her new married life. Some lists even include diaper money, a somewhat humorously direct token of appreciation to the bride's parents for the less glamorous aspects of child-rearing. Accompanying this veritable mountain of gifts was the second of the 3 letters, the gift letter. This was a meticulously detailed list of every single item being presented, serving as both a record and a testament to the groom's family's generosity and respect. This elaborate exchange wasn't just about showing off wealth, though that was certainly a component. It was a deeply serious demonstration of the groom's family's commitment and their ability to provide for the bride. Now, the bride's family didn't just passively receive all these goodies. The principle of reciprocity was strong. In a ritual known as return gifts, the bride's family would return a significant portion of the betrothal gifts they had received, often around 20 to 50%, though the exact amount could vary and was usually agreed upon beforehand. They might also add some gifts of their own. This act was a crucial gesture of goodwill, signifying their acceptance of the union and their desire to maintain a harmonious relationship between the two families. It showed that they weren't just selling their daughter, but were entering into a respectful alliance. At this point, the bride's family would also typically present the bride's dowry. This consisted of her personal trousseau and household items that she would bring to her new home, such as clothing, jewelry, furniture, bedding, and sometimes even a chamber pot, which might be auspiciously filled with fruits and strings of coins for good luck. For wealthy families, the dowry procession was another opportunity to display their social status and their affection for their daughter, sometimes even including serving girls to attend to her in her new life. While ancient dowries often represented significant material wealth, in more modern interpretations, they can be more symbolic, representing wishes for happiness and togetherness. This entire stage was a complex dance of economic exchange, symbolic communication, and public affirmation of the impending marriage, solidifying the alliance and setting the stage for the final steps. With the major gifts exchanged, the betrothal solidified, and both families deeply invested in the union, it was time for the fifth etiquette, formally requesting and setting the wedding date. Although an auspicious date had likely been identified earlier, this was the formal act of the groom's family proposing this specific date to the bride's family for the wedding ceremony. This was often done through another formal letter. If the bride's family agreed to the proposed date, they would signify their consent by sending back a portion of the betrothal cakes they had received, usually half. This act served as the final confirmation of the wedding date. With this agreement, the families could now confidently send out wedding invitations to their relatives and friends. The long and winding road of prenuptial negotiations and rituals was nearing its end, and the actual wedding day was finally, officially, on the horizon. The meticulous nature of these gift exchanges and date settings underscores the immense importance placed on ensuring every aspect of the marriage was auspicious and agreed upon, leaving as little as possible to chance in a world where harmony with cosmic and social order was paramount. So with all this talk of matchmakers, fortune-tellers, complex gift exchanges that could rival a small country's GDP, and astrological charts that dictated romantic futures, you might be sitting there on your comfy pillow wondering, but where's the love? Did anyone in ancient China actually, fall in love? Well, that's a fantastic question. And the answer is, as with most things in history, a bit complicated, like a badly translated IKEA manual. In the grand scheme of ancient Chinese marriage, romantic love, that heart-pounding, sonnet-inspiring, can't-eat, can't-sleep kind of love, was generally not the primary driver for getting hitched. As we've seen, marriages were predominantly arranged by parents, with the matchmaker as the chief negotiator. The main goals were far more pragmatic, forging alliances between families, ensuring the continuation of the ancestral line, preferably with sons, thank you very much, maintaining social order, and pooling resources. A young person's personal preference for a partner, if they even had one, often had little impact on the parent's choice. So if you were a young maiden or a hopeful scholar, your future spouse was less likely to be someone you'd shared longing glances with across a crowded marketplace, and more likely someone your parents and a fortune-teller deemed astrologically sound and from a family with a decent number of pigs. Did this mean that no one in ancient China ever experienced the dizzying heights of romantic love? Of course not. Humans are, after all, remarkably consistent in their capacity for affection, passion, and occasionally, terrible romantic decisions, regardless of the era. However, if love did blossom, it was often seen as a fortunate bonus. After all, the practical, familial, and societal boxes had been ticked. Or, and this is where things get juicy for storytellers like us, it became the stuff of high drama, whispered legends, and epic poems, precisely because it often went against the grain of societal expectations. These tales of ardent love, often tragic, reflected the people's recognition of sincere love, and perhaps a yearning for it, even if it wasn't the everyday reality for most. And oh, the legends ancient China produced. These weren't just quaint folk tales. They were cultural touchstones, often highlighting couples who dared to defy the rigid social norms surrounding marriage, which is probably a big reason why they became so famous and beloved. They were the romantic rebels, the exceptions that perhaps didn't just prove the rule, but also offered a glimmer of what if. Probably the most famous of these, a story that has echoed through centuries in opera, art and film, is The Butterfly Lovers. This is often dubbed the Chinese Romeo and Juliet, and for good reason, given its themes of passionate love and tragic ends. Picture this: it's the Eastern Jin dynasty, and we have our heroine, Zhu Yingtai. She's the bright, only daughter of a wealthy family, and she's absolutely desperate for an education. The catch: in that era, formal schooling was pretty much a boys-only club. But Zhu is not one to be easily deterred. She manages to convince her father, how we can only imagine, probably with some serious determination, to let her attend classes, but with a condition. She has to go disguised as a young man. So, off she goes to Hangzhou for her studies. On her journey, or perhaps at the school, she meets Liang Shanbo, a fellow scholar from a more modest background. They hit it off immediately, finding a strong affinity for each other, and soon they're the best of friends, even taking an oath of fraternity, becoming sworn brothers. For 3 years, they study together, eat together, probably pull a few all-nighters cramming for exams together. And during this time, Zhu, our disguised maiden, falls deeply and irrevocably in love with Liang. She tries to drop hints. Bless her heart. She compares them to a pair of mandarin ducks, a classic symbol of lovers in Chinese culture. But Liang, bless his sweet, oblivious soul, just thinks she's being an exceptionally poetic and affectionate brother. He doesn't have the slightest clue that his best mate is actually a woman. One day, Zhu receives a letter from her father, summoning her home urgently. Her heart sinks. She has to leave Liang, but she's determined to be with him. Before she departs, she takes a gamble. She reveals her true identity to the headmaster's wife, and entrusts her with a jade pendant to give to Liang, a clear betrothal gift. As Liang accompanies his sworn brother for the first 18 miles of her journey home, Zhu makes more desperate attempts to hint at her true self, but poor Liang remains adorably clueless. Finally, Zhu comes up with a plan. She tells Liang that she has a sister back home, and that he should visit her family later to propose marriage to this sister, whom she implies would be a perfect match for him. Months pass. Liang, finally taking the hint or perhaps just missing his friend, decides to visit Zhu's home. And there, the truth is revealed. His dear brother Yingtai is in fact the beautiful Zhu Yingtai. They are overjoyed, their love for each other is confessed, and they make a solemn vow to be together for eternity, till death do us part. It's the romantic climax they've both dreamed of, but alas, this is a tragedy, remember. Their joy is brutally short-lived. Zhu's parents, completely unaware of her heart's desire, or perhaps choosing to ignore it for a more suitable match, have already arranged her marriage to a wealthy and influential merchant named Ma Wenchai. When Liang hears this devastating news, he is utterly heartbroken. His health rapidly deteriorates, consumed by grief and despair, and he eventually dies, some say as a county magistrate, his dreams shattered. Fast forward to Zhu Yingtai's wedding day to Ma Wenchai. As her bridal procession makes its way, a fierce storm suddenly kicks up, and strong winds prevent the entourage from proceeding past Liang Shanbo's grave, which happens to lie along the route. Zhu, overwhelmed with grief and despair, leaves her sedan chair and goes to Liang's graveside to pay her respects. She weeps, she laments, and in a moment of ultimate anguish, she begs for the grave to open up, so she can join her beloved. And then, with a deafening clap of thunder, the earth trembles, and Liang's grave miraculously splits open. Without a moment's hesitation, Zhu Yingtai throws herself into the abyss to be reunited with Liang in death. Just as suddenly, the grave closes, but then, from the tomb, a pair of beautiful butterflies emerges, fluttering up into the sky, their spirits finally together, free from the constraints of the mortal world and their families' expectations. It's a story that has made audiences weep for centuries, a poignant testament to a love that defied convention, even in death. Then there's the famous play, Romance of the Western Chamber, another cornerstone of Chinese romantic literature, written during the Yuan dynasty. This tale spins the story of a young scholar Zhang Sheng, who, while staying at a temple, encounters the beautiful Kui Yingying, the daughter of the recently deceased prime minister. Naturally, it's love at first sight for Zhang Sheng. However, their budding romance faces immediate peril when a group of bandits besieges the temple, intent on capturing Yingying. Zhang Sheng, through cleverness and courage, and a bit of help, manages to save the day. As a reward, Yingying's mother initially promises her daughter's hand to him, but then, in a classic case of parental backtracking due to social status differences, she reneges on her promise. This, of course, only fuels the lovers' determination. Their secret love affair blossoms, full of clandestine meetings, exchanged poems, and longing glances, all facilitated by Yingying's incredibly resourceful and sympathetic maid, Hongyang. Hongyang becomes a legendary figure in her own right, the archetypal clever servant who helps young lovers overcome obstacles. The play is celebrated for its intricate plot, rich character development, and profound emotional depth. More than just a love story, it subtly critiques the rigid societal constraints, class structures, and familial opposition that sought to dictate matters of the heart. Ultimately, through perseverance, wit, and Hongyang's invaluable assistance, Zhang Sheng and Ku Yingying's love triumphs, making it a more optimistic counterpoint to the tragedy of the butterfly lovers. And these are just two of the most prominent examples. Ancient China was rich with other such tales. There's The Cowherd and the Weaver Girl, a celestial romance between a mortal cowherd and a heavenly weaver girl, a goddess really, who are separated by the Milky Way and allowed to meet only once a year, on the 7th day of the 7th lunar month, when a bridge of magpies forms for them. This story is the origin of the Kexi festival, often referred to as Chinese Valentine's Day. Then, there's the heart-wrenching story of Meng Jiang weeping down the Great Wall. Meng Jiang's husband is forcibly taken away to build the Great Wall, shortly after their wedding. When she travels thousands of miles to bring him winter clothes, she learns he has died, and his body is buried within the massive structure. Her grief is so immense that she weeps for 3 days and nights, and her sorrowful cries cause a section of the Great Wall to collapse, revealing her husband's remains. And we can't forget the legend of the White Snake, a captivating tale of love between a powerful white snake spirit who takes human form and a mortal man. a romance that defies supernatural boundaries and faces immense trials. These stories, often immortalized and spread through literature, opera, and folk traditions, played a crucial role. They kept the ideal of romantic love, of choosing one's partner based on affection and devotion, alive in the popular imagination, even if it wasn't the lived reality for most people when it came to their own marriages. They were the romantic fantasies, the emotional escape, the what-if scenarios in a world largely governed by duty, pragmatism, and parental decree. They highlight a persistent human yearning for deep personal connection, a theme that resonated powerfully even within a society that prioritized the collective over the individual in matters of marriage. The very existence and enduring popularity of these narratives suggest a cultural space where the ideals of romantic love, often suppressed in official or formal marriage arrangements, could be explored, celebrated, and mourned. They served as a kind of cultural safety valve, allowing for the expression of emotions and desires that the highly structured marriage system didn't always accommodate. The common trope of disguise, like Zhu Yingtai dressing as a man, or the secrecy of Zhang Sheng and Kui Yingying's meetings, underscores just how unconventional and daring such romantic pursuits were, requiring a break from normal social interactions for love to even have a chance to blossom outside the arranged channels. The night before the wedding was a hive of activity and deeply symbolic rituals, all designed to prepare the bride and groom for their new life and to ensure an auspicious start to their union. One of the key ceremonies was the hair-combing ritual. Both the bride and groom would typically first cleanse themselves, sometimes by showering with pomelo leaves, which were believed to wash away bad spirits and purify the body. After this, they would change into new red clothing and slippers, red being the ubiquitous color of joy and good luck in Chinese traditions. Then, a woman of good fortune, usually a respected female relative who had a happy marriage, living parents, children, and grandchildren, embodying a life of completeness and luck, would perform the hair combing. For the bride, who would be seated in front of a mirror or a window, and for the groom, seated facing the inside of his house, this woman would light incense and a pair of red taper candles. She would then comb their hair 4 times, reciting specific blessings with each stroke. These blessings typically wished for: first comb, a long-lasting and harmonious union. Second comb, a harmonious and happy marriage, with the couple growing old together. Third comb, an abundance of children and grandchildren. Fourth comb, prosperity, wealth, and longevity for the couple and their family. After the combing, red yarn, sometimes with cypress leaves, symbolizing evergreen vitality, would be clipped into their hair, officially marking the end of this. For the bride, this was particularly significant, as her hairstyle would change. Before marriage, a girl's hair was often worn in a way that signified her unmarried status. Now, it would be styled up, sometimes with hairpins, indicating her transition to a married woman. Another crucial pre-wedding ritual, usually taking place 2 to 3 days before the wedding, on an auspiciously chosen day and time, was the preparation of the matrimonial bed. Again, a female relative blessed with good fortune would lead this ritual. The bed would be dressed in brand new red bedding and pillows. Then, a delightful mix of dried fruits and nuts, such as longans, symbolizing completeness or many sons, persimmons, things going as one wishes, red dates, symbolizing fertility and having children soon, peanuts, which sounds like to give birth to many, pomegranates, many seeds for many children, lotus seeds, which sounds like continuous suns, would be scattered across the bed. This was all done to invoke blessings for a sweet, long-lasting marriage, and most importantly, abundant fertility. To amplify this wish for children, youngsters, especially boys, were often invited onto the newly prepared bed to play and scramble for the scattered fruits and nuts. The more children playing, the merrier, as it was seen as a potent omen for the couple's own future family. And once this bed was ritually prepared, a strict rule applied. No one else could sit or sleep in it until the bride and groom returned together on their wedding night. It was a sacred space, primed for the start of their new life and the generation of heirs. On the actual wedding day, as the bride prepared to leave her natal home, the atmosphere wasn't always one of unadulterated joy. Tradition often required the bride to weep and express reluctance to leave her family, particularly with her mother. This display of sorrow, whether entirely heartfelt or partly ritualistic, served as a public acknowledgement of the profound separation she was about to undergo, leaving the family she grew up with to join another. It was a poignant moment, recognizing the gravity of her transition. In some regions, this emotional preparation might have started even earlier. The bride might spend several days before the wedding in a sort of retreat, sometimes called retreating to the cockloft, with her close female friends and relatives. During this time they would sing laments, mourning her impending departure from her familiar life, and her separation from her family. These songs could also, quite interestingly, include playful curses aimed at the matchmaker, the groom's family, and even her own parents for marrying her off. This provided a culturally sanctioned outlet for any anxieties or sadness the bride might be feeling. Meanwhile, the groom was undergoing his own set of preparations for the pivotal act of fetching the bride, which is the sixth and final of the 6 etiquettes. Before setting off, he might participate in a capping ritual. Dressed in a long red gown, red shoes, and a red silk sash often adorned with a silk ball on his shoulder, the groom would kneel at his family altar. His father would then place a cap, sometimes decorated with cypress leaves, on his head. Following this, the groom would perform bows, first to the tablets representing heaven and earth and his ancestors, then to his parents and other assembled family members. The silk ball from his sash might then be removed by his father and placed on top of the bridal sedan chair that would carry his bride. Then, the groom would lead a vibrant and noisy procession from his home to the bride's residence. This wasn't a quiet affair. The air would be filled with the deafening din of firecrackers, set off to ward away evil spirits and announce the joyous occasion. Loud gongs and drums would beat, and musicians would play festive tunes. The groom, often accompanied by a young boy as an omen for future sons, would lead this lively parade. The bridal sedan chair, usually ornate and draped in red satin and fresh flowers, was a key part of this procession, carried by attendants. The procession might also include people carrying lanterns and banners, and sometimes even a dancing lion or unicorn to add to the spectacle and auspiciousness. The bride, back at her home, would be ready and waiting, dressed in her magnificent red wedding gown. This could be a traditional long dress, or more specifically for weddings, a 2-piece outfit, exquisitely embroidered with gold and silver threads, often featuring auspicious symbols like dragons, for the groom, and phoenixes, for the bride. Her face would often be covered with a red silk veil, or an elaborate beaded curtain that hung from her bridal phoenix crown, adding an element of mystery and tradition. But the groom couldn't just walk in and claim his bride. Oh no, that would be too easy. This is where the fun and often hilarious tradition of Chinese wedding door games came into play. The bridesmaids, acting as the bride's loyal protectors and playful tormentors, would barricade the door and refuse entry to the groom and his entourage of groomsmen. They would then subject the groom to a series of challenges, tests and games, designed to prove his love and sincerity, and often, his endurance for mild public humiliation. These games, rooted in the ancient belief that the bride was a prized daughter, whom the family was reluctant to let go of easily, could range from the physically demanding, like performing a certain number of push-ups or difficult yoga poses, to the mentally taxing, answering tricky questions about the bride or their relationship, solving riddles, or the creatively embarrassing, singing love songs off-key, performing silly dances, or reciting heartfelt love poems. Sometimes, the challenges involve tasting the 4 flavors of love. Concoctions representing sweetness, sourness, bitterness, and spiciness, symbolizing the different facets of married life the groom was about to embark on. And for a real test of mettle, some groomsmen might even face the dreaded leg-waxing punishment. Throughout this ordeal, the groom would often have to bribe the bridesmaids with red envelopes filled with money, to persuade them to open the door, or make the challenges a little easier. It was all conducted in a spirit of boisterous fun, and served as an entertaining prelude to the more solemn parts of the wedding, allowing the bride's side to playfully assert her value before she departed. Once the groom had successfully navigated the door games, and earned his bride, she would be formally escorted from her home. This was another moment steeped in ritual. The bride might be carried to the main hall of her house on the back of a good luck woman, or her most senior sister-in-law. There she would don her wedding jacket and skirt, and step into a pair of red shoes that had been placed in the center of a sieve. The sieve was believed to strain out evil and bad luck. Her feet were of paramount importance during this transition. They were not supposed to touch the bare ground between her home and the bridal sedan chair, as this was thought to attract malevolent spirits. So she would be carefully carried or walk on special mats to the sedan. The bridal sedan chair itself was a magnificent affair, typically red and opulently decorated with embroidery, tassels, and sometimes fresh flowers, a mobile sanctuary for the bride on her journey. As she was transferred to the sedan, an umbrella, often red, might be held over her head to shield her from evil influences, or even from the gaze of the heavens at this liminal moment. Further protective measures included hanging a sieve and a bright metallic mirror at the rear of the sedan. The sieve to filter out evil, and the mirror to reflect away any harmful influences or light up the path. As the bride departed from her natal home, she might toss a fan out of the sedan window. This act symbolized leaving behind her old temper, her maidenly life, and any past negativities, ensuring she entered her new life with a fresh start. And through every stage of this elaborate day, from the pre-dawn preparations to the final journey to the groom's home or wedding venue, one color reigned supreme: red. Red wedding invitations with gold lettering, red bridal attire, red shoes, red veils, red candles, red decorations on the sedan chair, red banners, and of course, red envelopes. In Chinese culture, red is the quintessential color of auspiciousness. It embodies luck, joy, love, fertility, success, honor, and prosperity. It's also believed to possess protective qualities, capable of diverting negative energy and warding off evil spirits. So, a traditional Chinese wedding was, quite literally, painted red, a vibrant, pulsating symbol of all the good fortune and happiness wished upon the new couple. These rituals surrounding the bride's departure and journey were not just quaint customs. They were deeply imbued with meaning, designed to protect the bride during a vulnerable transitional period, to mark her separation from her natal family, and to ensure her auspicious arrival into her new life and new family. The sheer number of protective symbols and actions highlights a worldview where the spiritual and material realms were closely intertwined, and where ensuring good fortune required active participation in time-honored traditions. After the whirlwind of the procession, the possible exhaustion from door games, and the emotional departure from the bride's home, the bride would finally arrive at the groom's house or the designated wedding venue. And, you guessed it, her arrival would be heralded by more music and another barrage of firecrackers, to continue warding off any lingering evil spirits, and to announce the joyous arrival to the groom's family and ancestors. The bride, still veiled, would be carefully led, often along a red carpet, into the heart of the celebration. Now came one of the most solemn and central parts of the entire wedding, the ceremony of the three kowtows. The bride and groom, both typically dressed in traditional red wedding attire, would stand before the family altar, or a specially prepared area. Here they would perform three distinct sets of deep bows or kowtows, which involved kneeling and touching their foreheads to the ground as a sign of profound respect. The order and recipients of these bows were deeply significant. First, the couple would kowtow to heaven and earth, acknowledging the vast cosmic forces that govern life and destiny, and seeking their blessings upon the marriage. Second, they would kowtow to the groom's ancestral tablets, and to their parents. Both sets, though the groom's parents were often the primary focus at this stage, as the bride was joining their lineage. This bow signified respect for their lineage, gratitude to their ancestors for their existence, and filial piety towards their living parents. Third, the bride and groom would kowtow to each other, symbolizing their mutual respect, their commitment to one another, and the official formation of their husband and wife bond. This series of kowtows was, in essence, the core wedding ceremony, the ancient Chinese equivalent of exchanging vows in Western traditions. It was a powerful ritual that didn't just unite two people, but formally placed their union within the much larger context of the family, the ancestors, and the entire cosmic order, reinforcing the fundamental values of Confucian society. Following the solemnity of the kowtows, another pivotal ritual would take place, the tea ceremony. This was far more than just a polite offering of a beverage. It was a deeply significant act of respect, and a formal way for the bride to be introduced to and accepted by the groom's family, and for both to honor their elders. The couple, often kneeling, would serve tea to the groom's parents first, addressing them by their new, formal titles, e.g., father, mother. Then, they would proceed to serve tea to other senior relatives in strict order of seniority: grandparents, granduncles and aunts, then uncles and aunts, always serving the father's side of the family before the mother's side. Younger siblings or cousins might assist the couple in preparing and serving the tea. The tea itself was often a special brew, perhaps sweetened or containing symbolic ingredients like lotus seeds and red dates for fertility, or even a blend known as 8 treasures tea, symbolizing wealth and prosperity. As the elders received the tea, they would offer their blessings for the marriage and, importantly, give the couple red envelopes containing money or gold jewelry, as a welcoming gift and a token of their acceptance and good wishes. This exchange was a powerful and tangible demonstration of the bride's integration into the new family structure, and the elders' formal acknowledgement of the union. In some traditions, the bride might have also performed a private tea ceremony for her own parents on the morning of the wedding, before leaving her home, as a gesture of gratitude and farewell. And then, after all the rituals, the bows, and the respectful tea offerings, it was finally time to celebrate with a grand wedding banquet, which literally translates to joyful wine. In Chinese culture, the wedding banquet was, and often still is, an event of enormous importance, sometimes considered even more significant than the wedding ceremony itself. It was not merely a meal, it was an elaborate feast, a public celebration of the union, a gesture of thanks and appreciation to the guests and to the relatives who had raised the bride and groom, and yet another opportunity to load up on auspicious symbolism through food. These banquets were typically lavish affairs, often featuring 8 to 10 courses, or even more, with each dish meticulously chosen not just for its taste but for its symbolic meaning, conveying blessings for happiness, longevity, fertility, prosperity, and family unity. Some of the common symbolic dishes included a whole fish, served with the head and tail intact, symbolizing abundance or surplus and completeness; roast duck or chicken, often served whole, signifying fidelity, prosperity, peace, and completeness. Chicken could also represent the phoenix, the female counterpart to the dragon, often representing the groom. Lobster, representing the dragon, the male symbol, was often paired with chicken, the phoenix, to symbolize the harmonious union of yin and yang, or male and female energies. The red color of cooked lobster also added to the auspiciousness. Long noodles, symbolizing a wish for a long and happy life and longevity for the couple. Dumplings, especially those shaped like ancient Chinese gold ingots, were served to symbolize wealth and good fortune. Scallops were often included as a symbol of fertility and the wish for the couple to raise many children. Sweet sticky rice balls represented family togetherness, unity, and a sweet relationship. A sweet red bean soup, often cooked with lotus seeds and red dates, was a classic dessert. The pronunciation of lotus seeds sounds like continuous suns, and dates sound like to have a baby soon, making this dish a potent wish for fertility and many children in quick succession. Shark fin soup, though highly controversial today due to ethical and environmental concerns, was historically a luxurious dish served at celebratory banquets to symbolize prestige and wealth. Squab or other fowl might be served to symbolize peace for the newlyweds as they began their life together. During the course of this extensive banquet, the bride often underwent several outfit changes. She might start in her traditional red wedding dress, then change into a Western-style white wedding gown, a modern influence, and perhaps into a third gown, like a ball gown or another formal dress, for later parts of the reception. The groom would typically wear a black tuxedo or a traditional Chinese long shirt. A very important part of the banquet involved the newlyweds going from table to personally greet their guests, share toasts, usually with wine or strong liquor, and thank them for their presents and gifts. This ritual was a way to show respect to all attendees and ensure that everyone felt acknowledged. The wedding banquet was thus a long, loud, joyful, and incredibly filling affair, meticulously designed to not only celebrate the new union, but also to reinforce family ties, display social status, and shower the couple with as many edible blessings as possible. The entire sequence, from the kowtows to the final course of the feast, served to integrate the couple into their new roles and into the wider community, all while adhering to traditions steeped in centuries of cultural meaning. So, the vows have been kowtowed with utmost solemnity. The tea has been respectfully served and sipped. The 10-course, or more, symbolic meal has been valiantly demolished, and the last of the wedding guests have finally stumbled home, full of joyful wine and good wishes. What now for our newly minted bride? Well, her journey, in many ways, was really just beginning. She wasn't just acquiring a husband, she was being fundamentally transplanted from her natal family into an entirely new familial ecosystem, his family. Upon marriage, a woman in ancient China typically went to live with the groom in his parents' house, or, if he had his own establishment, within his household, which often included his extended family. While she usually kept her own family surname, her primary loyalties, duties, and indeed, her entire social identity, were now expected to shift and align with her husband's kin. And who was the most powerful figure she would encounter in this new domestic landscape? More often than not, it wasn't her husband, especially in the early days of the marriage. It was her mother-in-law. The relationship between a daughter-in-law and her husband's mother is legendary in many cultures for its potential complexities, and ancient China was certainly no exception. In traditional Chinese households, particularly those operating under the strong influence of Confucian and later Neo-Confucian ideals, the mother-in-law often wielded absolute or near-absolute power over her son's wife. She was the established matriarch of the domestic sphere, the one who set the rules, managed the household, and to whom the new bride owed deference and service. The daughter-in-law, entering this established hierarchy as an outsider, was expected to be diligent, obedient, respectful, and above all, filial, demonstrating profound piety and subservience not just to her husband, but critically, to his parents. This dynamic was often fraught with tension. The mother-in-law, having likely endured a similar period of subordination when she herself was a young bride, might now exercise her hard-won authority with considerable vigor. The young bride was under intense scrutiny, her every action judged, and she had to work hard to earn her place and prove her worth within the new family. This power imbalance profoundly shaped the bride's daily life, dictating everything from her share of household chores to her interactions with other family members, and eventually, her role in childcare. It was a relationship that required immense tact, resilience, and often, a great deal of quiet endurance on the part of the daughter-in-law. The expectations placed upon a new bride were numerous and weighty. Central to all of them was the concept of filial piety. This wasn't just about being polite, it was a core moral and social obligation, demanding absolute respect, obedience, and dedicated care for her husband's parents. Confucius himself stressed filial piety as the very foundation of all virtuous practice. For a bride, this meant her actions were constantly measured against this ideal. Her primary duty, in the eyes of her new family, was often seen as serving and honoring her parents-in-law, a responsibility that could sometimes even overshadow her bond with her husband, at least in the initial stages of marriage. Then, there was the immense overarching pressure to produce heirs, and not just any heirs, sons. In a society that prioritized patrilineal descent, where sons were essential to carry on the family name, perform ancestral rites, and care for parents in their old age, the birth of a son was of paramount importance. As the old proverb starkly put it, a boy is born facing in, a girl is born facing out, meaning a daughter would eventually leave to join another family, while a son remained to build his own. Consequently, a wife who failed to produce a male heir could face considerable distress and a diminished status within the family, and it was a common justification for her husband to take a concubine. Women were often considered most valuable when they had given birth, particularly to a son, as this was when they were treated with the most respect. Beyond these crucial duties, a wife was generally expected to manage the myriad tasks of the household. While upper-class women might have had servants to command, they were still responsible for overseeing the domestic sphere, which could include managing household finances, educating the young children, and ensuring the smooth running of daily life. For women of lower social strata, this meant hands-on labor, cooking, cleaning, weaving, and childcare, often alongside agricultural work if they were from peasant families. Diligence, frugality, and competence in these domestic roles were highly valued. Underpinning all these expectations was the general societal norm of female subservience. A woman was expected to obey her husband, and by extension his entire family. Her individual desires, ambitions, or opinions often had to take a back seat to the collective needs, harmony, and reputation of her husband's household. Life for a new bride in ancient China was thus a complex and often challenging balancing act. She had to navigate intricate family dynamics, prove her worth through diligent service and, ideally, the birth of sons, and fulfill a demanding set of duties, all while adapting to a new environment where she often had little initial power or emotional support. It was a world where her value was frequently measured by her contributions to the patriarchal family's continuity and order, a reality far removed from the romantic ideals often portrayed in popular love stories. Yet it was within this framework that generations of women lived, adapted, and found ways to carve out their existence, exert influence, and ultimately become the respected mothers-in-law of the future. Now, while a man in ancient China was, by law and custom, permitted to have only one official wife, this didn't necessarily mean his household was limited to just one female partner. especially if he possessed wealth, status, or a pressing need for more heirs. This is where the institution of concubinage comes into the picture. A concubine was a woman who lived with a married man in a recognized quasi-matrimonial relationship, but to whom he was not formally married with the elaborate 6 etiquettes we've discussed. The primary and most socially sanctioned reason for a man to take concubines was to ensure the birth of male progeny, particularly if his principal wife had not produced a son to carry on the family name and ancestral rights. This was a matter of immense importance in a society obsessed with lineage. Beyond this, concubines also served to please the man and expand the prestige and labor pool of his household. The acquisition of a concubine was a much simpler affair than a formal marriage. They were often purchased, their status akin to that of a servant or slave, though generally a step above. Women from lower social backgrounds, or those whose families had fallen on hard times, might end up as concubines. Unlike a wife, a concubine did not bring a dowry to the household. Their legal and social standing was significantly inferior to that of the wife. While they were recognized as legitimate sexual partners and were expected to bear children for the master of the house, they were always subservient to the principal wife. Any children born to a concubine were considered legitimate, but were of lower social status than the children of the wife. These children had a complex filial duty, owing respect and obedience to both their biological mother, the concubine, and their legal mother, the wife of their father. After a concubine's death, her own sons might make offerings to her, but this duty typically did not extend to her grandsons, who would usually only make offerings to their grandfather's principal wife, further underscoring the concubine's marginal kinship status. Legally, there were attempts, particularly from the Eastern Han period onwards, to limit the number of concubines a man could have based on his rank and age. For instance, the law of the Ming dynasty stipulated that a commoner could only take concubines if he was at least 40 years old, and still without a son, with a penalty of 40 strokes for offenders. However, in practice, especially for the wealthy and powerful, these regulations were often disregarded if a man had the financial means and the desire to expand his household. The more noble and high-ranking the man, the more concubines he was generally permitted to have. The imperial court, naturally, took concubinage to its most extreme and elaborate form. Emperors maintained vast numbers of concubines, known as imperial consorts, within the secluded walls of the Forbidden City. These imperial consorts were organized into complex hierarchies with distinct ranks and titles, and their lives were strictly regulated, traditionally guarded by eunuchs to ensure that any offspring were undoubtedly the emperor's. During the Ming dynasty, there was an official system for selecting these imperial concubines, often choosing girls between the ages of 14 and 16, based on their virtues, behavior, character, appearance, and physical condition. For a young woman and her family, being selected as an imperial concubine could be a path to immense honor and elevation in status, as her family might be bestowed with stipends, or even noble titles if she rose to a high rank. However, life in the palace was often a gilded cage, filled with intense rivalry, intrigue and isolation, as concubines vied for the emperor's favor and a more secure position for themselves and their children. Communication with the outside world, including their own families, was often strictly forbidden. Some Ming concubines faced an even grimmer fate, the practice of immolation, where they were either executed or compelled to commit suicide to be buried with the deceased emperor, was a horrific reality in the early part of the dynasty, though it was officially stopped by Emperor Jingtong in 1464. Beyond the confines of formal marriage and concubinage, there existed another distinct class of women who played a unique role in ancient Chinese society, particularly in urban centers: the high-class courtesans, literally singer-performers. It's crucial to distinguish these women from common prostitutes. While sexual services might sometimes have been part of their interactions with clients, They were primarily sought after and celebrated for their artistic talents and cultivated companionship. They were highly skilled entertainers, rigorously trained from a young age in singing, dancing, playing musical instruments, and often in the literary arts, such as composing poetry or engaging in witty, intelligent conversation. This level of artistic and intellectual cultivation was deliberately fostered, especially during dynasties like the Ming, to clearly differentiate them from common prostitutes, particularly as increasing wealth allowed men of lower social standing to access basic sexual services, prompting high-status men to seek out courtesans for more refined and culturally rich experiences. Despite their talents and the often romanticized relationships they formed, the overall social standing of courtesans, like most entertainers in ancient China, was generally low. However, this didn't prevent some from achieving considerable fame, and even making significant contributions to the arts and literature of their time. During the Tang and Song dynasties, for example, courtesans played a vital role in the dissemination of poetry, as they would often perform well-known poems set to music, effectively popularizing literary works among a wider audience. Indeed, the poetry composed by courtesans themselves, rather than just their musical performances, was often held up as an example of their high cultural attainment. Educated men, particularly the scholar officials known as the literati, often formed deep and complex relationships with courtesans. These men sought out courtesans, not merely for fleeting entertainment or physical intimacy, but for intellectual and spiritual companionship, a level of engagement they might not always find with their wives, who, due to societal norms, often lacked extensive formal education in literature and the arts. A courtesan could discuss poetry, compose verses, play music, and engage in sophisticated conversation, offering a stimulating environment that many elite men craved. These relationships between literati and courtesans were frequently romanticized in literature and art, especially during the late Ming period, portrayed as idealized unions of beauty, talent, and intellect. Some famous courtesans became cultural icons, their wit, artistry, and charm celebrated in poems and stories. They weren't just selling a service, they were offering an experience, a blend of culture, companionship, and an idealized form of feminine allure and intelligence that was distinct from the roles women played within the traditional family structure. The existence of both concubines and accomplished courtesans thus reveals the multifaceted nature of gender relations and female roles in ancient China, extending beyond the singular path of wifely duty, and highlighting how patriarchal structures nonetheless created niches for different forms of female existence and influence, albeit often within constrained and hierarchical systems. For many women from impoverished backgrounds, becoming a concubine, despite its subservient status, could offer a degree of financial security and a safer alternative to outright prostitution. Similarly, for a talented girl, the path of a courtesan, while socially marginal, could lead to a life of artistic expression, and even a form of independence or influence rarely available to other women. Now, we must turn to some of the more somber and restrictive aspects that profoundly shaped the lives of women in ancient and imperial China, practices that, to modern sensibilities, seem almost incomprehensibly cruel, yet persisted for centuries. One of the most infamous of these is footbinding. For roughly 1,000 years, from its emergence around the 10th century, during the Song dynasty, until it was largely eradicated by the mid-20th century, this painful and debilitating custom was widespread. Imagine young girls, sometimes as tender as 3 years old, though more commonly between the ages of 4 and 6, undergoing this agonizing process, usually at the hands of their own mothers, grandmothers, or other older female relatives. The procedure involved tightly wrapping the girl's feet with long strips of cloth, forcing the 4 smaller toes to bend and fold under the sole of the foot, pressing them towards the heel. The ultimate idealized goal was to create a golden lotus foot, a tiny arched foot, measuring a mere 3 inches in length, barely larger than a modern credit card, though in reality, few achieved this extreme. Over time, with repeated binding, the bones of the arch and toes would often break and be permanently misshapen. Each time the feet were unbound for cleaning, a process that involved removing dead skin, pus, and dried blood, the bandages would be reapplied even tighter. The pain was, by all accounts, excruciating and constant, often leading to lifelong disabilities, infections, paralysis, gangrene, ulcerations, and in rare cases, even death. Once bound, a woman's feet would remain so for the rest of her life, encased in tiny, often beautifully embroidered decorative shoes and leggings that concealed the deformed reality underneath. So why on earth did such a brutal practice persist for so long and become so widespread, adopted by both upper classes and eventually even some poorer families? The reasons are complex and have been subject to much debate. The traditional explanation, and one that certainly holds some truth, points to male erotic fascination. It's believed to have originated with the allure of the small, pointed feet of court dancers, and over time, these tiny lotus feet became a powerful symbol of feminine beauty, delicacy, and sexual desirability. The altered gait of a woman with bound feet, a swaying, mincing walk, was also considered alluring by some men. Another prevalent theory is that foot binding was a deliberate method to ensure female subservience and chastity by severely limiting their mobility and power. A woman who could barely walk was less likely to wander, to be independent, or to engage in activities outside the confines of her home, thus reinforcing her dependence on men and her confinement to the domestic sphere. It starkly increased the perceived differences between the sexes and kept women in a subordinate position. However, more recent scholarship, such as the work led by Melissa Brown, based on extensive interviews with elderly women who had actually experienced foot binding, has introduced a compelling economic dimension. This research suggests that, particularly in some regions and contexts, foot binding served as a way to keep young girls, who were often too small or weak for heavy agricultural labor, sedentary and focused on producing handicrafts. Tasks like spinning thread, weaving cloth, making shoes, or creating embroidery were crucial for household income, and a girl with bound feet was less likely to be distracted or to shirk these indoor tasks. These scholars argue that these daughters were contributing significantly to their family's economic well-being, feeding themselves and more than one family member through their labor. Regardless of its deepest origins or primary drivers, one thing became overwhelmingly clear to families across many strata of Chinese society: foot binding was inextricably linked to a girl's marriageability. Mothers bound their daughters' feet because they genuinely believed it would help them secure a better marriage, which in turn meant a more secure future and the ability to eat regularly. A secluded daughter with a pair of perfectly tiny bound feet could command a better bride price and was seen as a more desirable match, especially as one moved up the social ladder. For elite women, it became a symbol of refinement and status, a clear indicator that they did not need to perform manual labor. The practice eventually spread to poorer families as well, although they might bind their daughters' feet at a later age, or allow them to be unbound after marriage, if their labor was needed in the fields. Foot binding was also deeply ingrained as a rite of passage for young girls, a painful initiation into womanhood, believed to be a preparation for puberty, menstruation, and childbirth. It also formed a shared, albeit agonizing bond between daughters, mothers, and grandmothers, who were usually the ones to carry out the binding. Alongside such profound physical constraints, women in imperial China, particularly from the Song dynasty onwards with the hardening of Neo-Confucian ideals, faced immense ideological pressure regarding chastity and fidelity. This cult of chastity reached its zenith during the Ming and Qing dynasties. Central to this was the ideal of widow chastity. Neo-Confucian ethics strongly discouraged, and in many regions effectively forbade, a widow from remarrying. To do so was often seen as a profound disgrace, a betrayal of her deceased husband and his lineage, and even tantamount to adultery, because a woman's virtue required her to remain loyal to her husband forever, even after his death. A widow who remarried could be stripped of any privileges or property she held through her late husband's family, and would lose her place in his ancestral records. This wasn't just a social expectation, it was actively promoted and enforced by the state, especially during the Ming dynasty. Virginity for unmarried women was of course considered absolutely critical. The state went to great lengths to honor virtuous and filial women, particularly chaste widows. Honorary tablets, arches, or inscriptions on stone monuments were erected in their praise, often with imperial sanction. This societal and official adulation of female chastity escalated to such an extreme that many widows, facing pressure to remarry, perhaps for economic reasons by her late husband's family or her own natal family, or simply to demonstrate their unwavering virtue, chose to take their own lives. Such acts were not seen as tragic suicides in the modern sense, but as heroic acts of martyrdom, earning the woman and her family immense honor. Stories of these chastity martyrs, women who died resisting rape by invaders or criminals, or who chose death over remarriage, were widely circulated and celebrated as exemplars of the highest female virtue. This intense focus on female chastity was deeply intertwined with the patriarchal structure of society. It served to control women's sexuality, ensure the purity of the patrilineal line, and reinforce the idea that a woman's loyalty to her husband's family was absolute and lifelong, mirroring the loyalty owed to the emperor and the state. These two powerful forces, the physical ordeal of foot binding and the ideological vice of the chastity cult, profoundly shaped the existence of countless women in imperial China. They limited their physical autonomy, constrained their social and economic choices, and channeled their lives down very narrow prescribed paths, all in the name of deeply entrenched societal ideals of beauty, virtue, family honor, and social order. Now, it's incredibly important to remember that ancient China wasn't a single unchanging monolith of culture and tradition. We're talking about a civilization that spanned thousands of years, encompassing a vast array of dynasties, each with its own unique social currents, philosophical leanings, and consequently, variations in the lived experiences of its people, including women. So while the overarching themes of arranged marriages, filial piety, and patriarchal structures were persistent, the nuances of how these played out, and the degree of freedom or restriction women faced, did indeed ebb and flow with the changing tides of history. Let's take a stroll through a few key dynasties to get a sense of these shifts. The Tang dynasty, which flourished from 618 to 907 AD, is often looked back upon as a kind of golden age in Chinese history, renowned for its cosmopolitanism, cultural brilliance, and relative openness. And it seems that for women, particularly those of the elite classes, this era offered a bit more breathing room compared to the dynasties that followed. Historical records and artistic depictions from the Tang period suggest that women enjoyed comparatively greater freedoms in their social interactions, their dress, and even in matters of marriage. Some sources even indicate that Tang women had more agency in choosing their marriage partners, and could dissolve marriages with greater ease than in later periods. The legal codes of the Tang dynasty, for instance, while still upholding parental authority in engagements, did acknowledge that if an individual took a wife on their own initiative, the marriage could still be legalized, albeit with potential penalties for bypassing the elders. Perhaps most strikingly, women in the Tang dynasty could, to some extent, participate in the political sphere, a notion that would become almost unthinkable in later, more rigidly Confucian eras. The most famous example, of course, is Empress Wu Zetian, the only woman to ever officially rule China in her own right, who reigned for several decades during this period. Her extraordinary rise and rule, though controversial, undoubtedly had an impact, and perhaps encouraged other royal and aristocratic women to engage more actively in courtly life and even political discourse. Beyond politics, the social life of Tang women, at least among the elite, appears to have been more vibrant and less confined. Artwork from the era famously depicts women riding horses, playing polo, a popular sport among the aristocracy, and engaging in various outdoor activities, suggesting a lifestyle that was far from being strictly cloistered within the inner chambers of their homes. Their clothing styles were also known for being more relaxed and even daring at times, influenced by Central Asian cultures with which the Tang Empire had extensive contact. However, it's crucial to temper this image of Tang liberation with a dose of reality. While highborn women certainly seem to have enjoyed more latitude, life for women in the rural countryside or from lower social strata was likely still one of hard labor and limited opportunity, and even within the elite, traditional Confucian ideals of female domesticity and virtue were still very much present, as evidenced by paintings and literature that continue to extol these qualities. So while the Tang dynasty offered a period of relative openness for women, it was not a complete dismantling of patriarchal norms. Then came the Song dynasty, from 960 to 1279 AD. This era witnessed a significant philosophical shift with the rise and consolidation of Neo-Confucianism. This revitalized and reinterpreted form of Confucian thought, while aiming to bring moral order and renewal to society, had a profound and often restrictive impact on the status and roles of women. Many historians argue that the freedoms and social mobility women experienced during the Tang began to contract during the Song. Neo-Confucianism placed a renewed and intensified emphasis on patrilineal succession, strict gender roles, the separation of spheres, with men dominating the outer, public world and women confined to the inner, domestic realm, and, crucially, female chastity. It was during the Song dynasty that the practice of foot binding, which we discussed earlier, began to gain significant traction, particularly among the upper classes. It became a marker of refinement, status, and female delicacy, physically distinguishing elite women from peasant women who needed their feet for labor. The ideal of the frail, reserved, and delicate woman, in contrast to the more robust Tang ideal, gained prominence. Yet even within this more restrictive environment, Song women were not entirely without agency or rights. Unlike many of their European contemporaries, women in Song China were legally entitled to inherit a portion of their father's estate, especially if there were no male heirs. Furthermore, many women were actively involved in commerce and trade, sometimes out of necessity to support their families, and this participation often required them to develop some level of literacy to manage records and bills. Buddhist convents also continue to offer an alternative life path for some women, providing a space for education, spiritual pursuit, and a degree of autonomy outside the conventional marriage system. Moving forward to the Ming dynasty, 1368 to 1644 AD, the Neo-Confucian ideals regarding female virtue, particularly chastity, became even more deeply entrenched and vigorously promoted by the state. This was the era when the cult of chastity, especially for widows, reached its zenith. The state actively honored and memorialized women who chose suicide over remarriage, or who died defending their virtue. Women were increasingly idealized as paragons of loyalty and purity, confined ever more tightly to the domestic sphere and the service of their husband's family. Yet paradoxically, the Ming dynasty also saw a flourishing of popular culture that sometimes presented more complex and even contradictory images of women. There was a surge in erotic novellas, and the figure of the talented, intellectually stimulating courtesan, was often idealized in literature and art, suggesting that official ideology and popular sentiment didn't always march in perfect lockstep. So, what does this dynastic overview tell us about dating, or marriage formation in ancient China? It tells us that the experience was not uniform across time. A woman living in the Tang dynasty might have faced a different set of expectations, and perhaps possessed a slightly different range of choices or influences over her marital destiny, compared to her great-great-great-granddaughter living under the stricter Neo-Confucian codes of the Ming dynasty. The rules of the game for finding a spouse, the degree of personal agency involved, and the social pressures exerted upon individuals were constantly being subtly reshaped by the prevailing philosophies, economic conditions, and political climates of each specific era. Understanding this historical dynamism is key to appreciating the rich and varied tapestry of social life in ancient China. Well, there you have it. We've journeyed from the slightly intimidating presence of matchmakers armed with symbolic geese, to the nail-biting suspense of fortune-tellers decoding cosmic compatibility from birth charts. We've navigated the intricate multi-stage marathon of the 6 etiquettes, witnessed tearful, and sometimes strategically performed, bridal departures, and cheered, or winced, through the playful chaos of door games. We've kowtowed to heaven, earth, ancestors, and each other, and then feasted on meals where every dish whispered a wish for the future. Dating in ancient China, as we've come to understand, was less about romantic serenades under the moonlight, and much more about a serious, systematic, and overwhelmingly family-orchestrated process of union. It truly was a world away from our modern anxieties of crafting the perfect dating app bio, deciphering the true meaning of a one-word text, or wondering if 3 exclamation points is coming on too strong. Their anxieties, if we can imagine them, were probably more along the lines of, will the astrologer declare our birth hours to be a catastrophic mismatch, causing this entire multi-year, multi-gift negotiation to go up in a puff of unlucky smoke? Or, for the bride-to-be perhaps, will my future mother-in-law approve of my embroidery skills? Or am I doomed to a life of subtle sighs and passive-aggressive turnip stew? Looking back at this elaborate system, one can see a certain, dare I say, efficiency to some aspects of it. There were no endless, "So, what are we?" conversations that plague modern romance. The roles were clearly defined, the expectations were set, and the path to marriage, while long and complex, was at least clearly laid out. But, and it's a very significant but, that path was often incredibly narrow, offering little room for deviation, especially for women, whose lives were largely circumscribed by the needs and decisions of their families. Throughout our journey, we've seen the profound and inescapable importance of family, lineage, and the maintenance of social order, principles that were woven into the very fabric of every ritual, every gift exchanged, every bow performed. There was undeniable beauty and deep meaning in many of these traditions. The vibrant, joyous symbolism of the color red that painted every facet of the wedding, the profound respect for elders demonstrated in the solemnity of the tea ceremony, and the poetic, auspicious wishes embedded in every dish of the wedding banquet. These were customs designed to bind families, honor the past, and secure a prosperous future. However, we've also had to confront the harsher realities that often lay beneath the surface of these elaborate customs. There was the near-total lack of individual choice in selecting a life partner, a decision that profoundly impacted one's entire existence, yet was usually made by others. We've seen the immense pressure placed upon new brides to conform to the norms of their husband's household, to demonstrate unwavering filial piety, and, crucially, to produce sons to continue the patrilineage. The life of a young daughter-in-law, often under the strict and sometimes critical eye of a powerful mother-in-law, could be incredibly challenging. And we cannot forget the physically crippling custom of foot binding which, for centuries, limited women's mobility and autonomy in the name of beauty and status, nor the suffocating ideological constraints of the chastity cult, which placed a woman's virtue, particularly her loyalty to one man and one family, above all else, sometimes even above her own life. And yet, even in this highly structured and often restrictive social landscape, the human heart, in its persistent and sometimes rebellious way, always sought connection. The enduring popularity of poignant love stories like The Butterfly Lovers, or The Romance of the Western Chamber, serves as a powerful reminder that romantic love, passion, and the desire for a deep personal bond were not alien concepts. These tales, often celebrating love that defied convention or overcame immense obstacles, suggest that while love might not have been the prerequisite for marriage, for some fortunate couples, it might have been a quiet, unexpected discovery along the shared path of their arranged lives. Or, for the less fortunate, it remained a powerful, aspirational ideal, kept alive in art, opera, and whispered stories. So the next time you find yourself stressing about a first date, or trying to decode a cryptic message from a potential love interest, just take a moment to remember our ancient Chinese counterparts. At least you probably don't have to worry about your great-aunt Mildred dispatching a matchmaker to interrogate your date's family about the quality of their ancestral goat herd, or whether their precise hour of birth is cosmically aligned with yours for the optimal production of male heirs. It's all about perspective, right? Ultimately, dating, or rather, the intricate process of marriage formation, in ancient China, was a rich, complex tapestry woven from threads of tradition, obligation, profound symbolism, and meticulous social engineering. It tells us an immense amount about what that society valued most highly: continuity, order, family honor, and the harmonious functioning of the collective. It reveals how they perceived the roles of men and women, and how they sought to build stable family units as the bedrock for a stable society. It wasn't always fair by our modern standards. It certainly wasn't always romantic in the way we understand it today, but it was, without a doubt, an utterly fascinating and deeply human endeavor. If you've made it this far on our historical journey into the world of ancient Chinese betrothals and weddings, you are a true champion of the long-form bedtime story. Thank you for sticking with it. Please do hit that like button if you enjoyed our little trip through time, and subscribe if you haven't already. That scholar's robe is practically calling my name, and we're getting closer to that 1,000 subscriber goal. Most importantly, please share your final thoughts in the comments below. What was the most surprising, or perhaps the most unexpectedly relatable thing you learned about ancient Chinese dating tonight? It's always a joy to read your perspectives. Thanks so much for joining me. May your own romantic endeavors be significantly less complicated than the 6 etiquettes, and may your path to happiness be free of interfering geese. Sleep well.